Take it down by Friday or we'll bury you in penalties. Margaret Thornfield, chairwoman of our homeowners association, hissed while gesturing at the playhouse in my rear yard. Her diamond watch caught the sunlight, radiating arrogance as though my child's joy personally insulted her. My little girl perched on the tire swing nearby, her sneakers tracing patterns in the wood chips, oblivious to the brewing conflict around her. Margaret lunged forward unexpectedly, grabbing a rake from the maintenance crew's wagon and thrust it at the timber structure. "Since you refuse to remove it," she snarled, "we'll handle it for you." But her swing came too near. The metal teeth struck my child's temple before I could move. A sickening thud followed by stillness. My little one collapsed forward, the rope swing jerking under her limp form. I dove forward and grabbed her as she fell toward the mulch, her small fingers grasping my collar. Crimson seeped from behind her hairline, sticky on my palm. Margaret retreated slightly, her pupils dilating momentarily. Then she straightened her blazer and grumbled, "Perhaps keep your children away from hazardous equipment." I remained motionless. I simply allowed the quiet to expand before responding evenly and coldly. "That playhouse? I engineered it. It exceeds federal playground specifications for public recreational facilities." Her confident expression wavered initially. I witnessed the fracture in her facade. She hadn't anticipated pushback, especially from me. And before continuing, understand this. If you've witnessed an association overstep boundaries this severely, you'll need to hear what follows. Follow along immediately, because the aftermath summoned tactical response units to our streets. And believe me, you'll want to know how everything exploded. I'm Marcus Bradford. I'm a certified civil engineer. I've dedicated 2 decades to guaranteeing educational and recreational structures satisfy regulations that protect kids. Margaret assumed I was merely another resident she could bulldoze, but she misjudged her target. She didn't realize the playhouse represented more than lumber and hardware. It embodied my late wife's final project for our child before illness claimed her, and no association chair would eliminate that memorial disguised as community standards. That's why her demand struck beyond bureaucracy. She wasn't merely issuing penalties or violations. She was attacking the remaining evidence of my wife's devotion still standing in our property. Whenever my child kicked upward and flew skyward, she brought her mother's spirit along. Margaret's assault targeted not just structures. It targeted mourning, recovery, connection. The atmosphere carried fresh-mown lawn and pond scents, yet all I registered was my child's giggles nearby. Pure, unrestrained, untainted, clashing with Margaret's sharp, toxic voice. My hands tightened reflexively. I'd encountered boards intimidate, flex control, exploit positions previously. But this felt personal. This crossed boundaries. I wouldn't permit her to rewrite our family's narrative through intimidation and penalties. In that moment, I understood the conflict had already started. And if Margaret believed she wielded supremacy, she'd soon discover that occasionally the reserved resident possesses greater influence than she'd ever suspect. Margaret didn't retreat following that initial confrontation. Rather, my resistance appeared to intensify her fixation. The following dawn, I awakened to hammering on my entrance. Fluorescent yellow capital text announcing code breach. Urgent response demanded. I removed it and examined the manufactured allegations. Unapproved playhouse construction. Community liability pending demolition. She'd endorsed it personally underneath the association emblem. That dusk, when I passed the community entrance, I observed additional residences displaying identical yellow warnings. Various infractions, identical coercion. A weathered privacy barrier deemed excessive. A vegetable lattice unauthorized. Even a youth soccer goal suddenly classified dangerous. Margaret was creating precedent through me, yet she'd sacrificed the entire community alongside me to demonstrate her dominance. The recreation center lot revealed everything. Residents gathered in tense groups, clutching their violations like warrants. Several were furious, brandishing documents and murmuring intensely. Others appeared defeated, postures drooping, already surrendering to pressure. The sunset through the facility glass cast elongated shadows resembling prison bars over the concrete. I entered the space, all faces rotating as the entrance closed. Margaret's tone projected from the stage where officials assembled behind tables. She commanded attention, dramatically reciting breach after breach, performing as magistrate and executioner. The area reeked of cleanser and stale brew, yet underneath lurked the bitter scent of intimidation. I selected a rear position, observing. Penalties accumulated, 600 there, 1,200 elsewhere. One household with a wheelchair-bound teenager faced property seizure because their accessibility modifications disturbed visual cohesion. That instant, the atmosphere transformed. I recognized it in their expressions. Residents were understanding this wasn't regarding enhancement or regulations. It concerned dominance. I spoke up and allowed my statement to pierce the whispers. Margaret, you're aware your committee allowed coverage policies to expire 3 months ago, correct? Her neck twisted sharply, her grin solidifying. It wasn't complete disclosure. Not immediately, yet it revealed sufficient steel for all to recognize the threat existed. That frozen quiet confirmed I'd struck accurately. I didn't require advancing then. What counted was sowing uncertainty. Initially, the residents witnessed her composure fracture. They didn't comprehend yet how I discovered it or how extensive her failures extended. Yet they observed her reaction. The strain was tangible. Guardians adjusted positions, murmuring quietly, gripping violations harder. They weren't supporting me publicly, not immediately, but anxiety could transform to fury given proper ignition, and I'd just provided the spark. Margaret struck her hammer on the surface, attempting restoration of order. Yet her tone fluctuated subtly. Mr. Bradford, your statements are inappropriate. Her declaration meant zero now. All had detected the uncertainty in her authority. As proceedings concluded, I departed beneath the humming amber fixtures outside. Residents remained near me. They didn't state it directly, yet their gazes connected with mine extended beyond normal, appreciative and curious. They desired believing someone might challenge her. They simply required evidence it was achievable. And while I traversed that damaged asphalt, I grasped the actual consequences. This wasn't solely my battle now. Margaret's tyranny had contaminated all households here. My playhouse represented merely the initial skirmish, yet the campaign involved the neighborhood's essence. Triumph methodology advancement. The recreation center encounter enabled me to suggest her primary weakness, the absent coverage documentation. Without exposing my complete strategy, the concept was established and subsequently, the residents would start questioning her legitimacy. I didn't rest that evening. The fixture's illumination still glowed in recall. How residents remained with inquiries they wouldn't voice. Uncertainty had established itself, yet uncertainty independently wouldn't suffice. Margaret would constrict control, and when she executed that, individuals would either submit or someone would eventually break. The next sunrise, I traveled to the waterfront pathway, the single area in our district that appeared unaffected by Margaret's influence. The water glittered with dawn rays lapping softly on the pier. Exercisers and pet owners moved by, maintaining normalcy's illusion, yet I understood differently. Anxiety saturated everything. That's when I spotted him. David Chen, the association accountant. He positioned himself at the pier's terminus, documents pressed firmly to his torso. His attire was disheveled, necktie loose, suggesting he hadn't departed since the assembly. He hadn't noticed me initially. He gazed at the waves as though they contained solutions to queries solely he perceived. I approached carefully, silently enough to observe him. His frame sagged, teeth grinding. He transferred mass between legs, nervously striking the documents on his thigh. When he eventually detected me, he jolted, vision shifting like someone discovered transgressing. Then he manufactured a rigid expression that never touched his pupils. "Difficult evening?" I inquired, maintaining neutrality. He didn't reply initially. Rather, he massaged his forehead with fingers, joints pale, while documents in his opposite grip trembled sufficiently to expose him. That marked the initial moment I genuinely recognized it. The division within him. David wasn't similar to Margaret. He wasn't condescending or malicious. He was torn, caught between the compensation accompanying accountant duties and the remorse of observing households endure beneath policies he didn't support. His quiet had transformed into personal imprisonment. He started speaking, then stopped. His esophagus moved, consuming statements he couldn't chance. His vision moved to mine, then returned to water, then documents. His grip compressed the borders until sheets curved and wrinkled. Each action indicated someone battling with matters he couldn't voice publicly. "David," I stated deliberately, "you understand her actions are unlawful, and you realize it's merely time until someone suffers beyond penalties or seizures." His form solidified, frame stiffening, then gradually drooped as my statement's mass forced him downward. He didn't reply, yet he didn't require it. The remorse appeared obvious in how he lowered his vision, mouth sealed firmly, documents shaking more intensely currently. We remained quietly momentarily, birds calling above, the pier groaning underneath. Then, with an abrupt gesture, he inserted documents into his case, secured it, and adjusted his necktie. It represented someone replacing their disguise. He moved past me wordlessly, yet not before his vision moved toward mine, briefly, containing regret and caution. That expression communicated all. He was ensnared in Margaret's system, yet he desired escape. He desired another person to act decisively so he wouldn't need to. While I observed him depart, I recognized David represented the weakness in her committee's defenses. He possessed the figures, the documentation, the awareness of all shortcuts Margaret had taken. He didn't require delivering it immediately, yet his quiet wouldn't persist indefinitely. His morality was already consuming him internally, and if Margaret was careless sufficiently to assault a minor, then when David eventually shattered, he'd shatter completely. The inquiry wasn't whether merely timing, triumph methodology advancement. Through confronting David obliquely and witnessing his psychological battle, I verified he understood Margaret's failures with the association's coverage and additional breaches. His physical responses exposed the remorse destroying him, establishing conditions for him becoming the hesitant partner I'd require to reveal her completely. When David departed the pier that dawn, I recognized he transported beyond figures in his case. He transported reality, and eventually it would overwhelm him. Yet while he struggled with morality, Margaret was already organizing her subsequent action. She didn't spend moments recovering. She retaliated stronger, resolved to reclaim dominance. I experienced the impact 48 hours afterward when I arrived home and observed the orange barrier stretched over my property. Not official tape, association tape bearing their insignia. A sealed warning dangled from the playhouse labeled structure prohibited immediate risk. My child remained motionless on the entrance, holding her bag, viewing the barrier as though it formed a wall to her mother's remembrance. My core ignited. I ripped the warning away, crushing it within my grip. Margaret had exceeded violations and penalties. She was attempting to delete us publicly to convince my daughter her sanctuary was dangerous. It wasn't simply authority abuse now. It was mental combat. I understood challenging her publicly would merely support her position. Therefore, I traveled directly to the association's leased headquarters in town. The structure was a bland double-floor complex, positioned between medical and financial offices. Overhead lighting hummed while I entered through the entrance and walked into the waiting area. Margaret positioned herself within a minor meeting space, her committee assembled like loyal troops surrounding her. Via the transparent partition, I observed her reviewing folders, mouth tight with pleasure. She detected me and her sneer reappeared, more pointed than previously. She didn't even rise when I arrived. "You're intruding," she stated frigidly, indicating the exit. "No," I responded, placing the crushed warning on the surface among us. "I'm present to inform you that you lack jurisdiction to prohibit anything. You're not municipal, you're not regional, you're a residents association, and you've entered deception territory." Her expression slipped momentarily before returning. She signaled to the rest as though my statements were irritation, yet I observed how David adjusted in his position, evading my gaze. His fingers played with writing instruments, striking them on the surface with irregular beats. He was deteriorating, and Margaret didn't even detect it. She reclined, tone saturated with superiority. "Mr. Bradford, we'll observe your confidence when penalties accumulate. We possess jurisdiction to establish claims, and once that occurs, perhaps you'll reconsider before humiliating yourself at assemblies." I examined the expressions of remaining committee participants. They weren't pleased. They appeared exhausted, trapped. Margaret's intimidation might have maintained their quiet, yet uncertainty had already distributed. She didn't understand how unstable her position had grown. I positioned a duplicate of state association regulations on the surface, the portion regarding coverage obligations marked in bright highlighting. And when you function lacking protection insurance, all of you become individually liable for losses, attacks, damages, asset conflicts, everything. Do you genuinely believe your residents won't litigate when they discover you've been exposed legally? This complete period. The space became quiet. David's striking ceased. Another participant adjusted in their position, mouth sealed firmly. Margaret attempted laughter, yet it resonated empty. She pushed the documents toward me dismissively, yet disturbed. "You don't frighten me, Marcus. she stated, although her tone contained reduced strength than previously. "I'm not present to frighten you," I replied, my voice consistent. "I'm present to inform you that the policies you manipulate so casually can slice in reverse, and eventually they'll slice you." I departed the headquarters without awaiting her reaction. The hum of the overhead lighting accompanied me into the midday brightness. She believed coercion would conclude this, yet each action she performed merely buried her further. And currently her complete committee had observed the weaknesses. Triumph methodology advancement. Margaret's effort to prohibit the playhouse provided me the chance to challenge her explicitly with lawful limits and emphasize the committee's exposed responsibility. Through establishing this before all participants, I expanded the separation between her and her supporters. David's apparent distress verified he was near to breaking. When I departed that headquarters, the brightness touched my skin, yet it didn't provide heat. Margaret had dismissed my statements before her committee, yet I observed how her disguise shifted. She was disturbed, and more significantly, the rest had listened to me declare it openly. No coverage, no protection. That concept was planted currently, and concepts possess methods of developing, including in contaminated earth. Nevertheless, I understood discussion wasn't sufficient. If I desired to advance this past rumors and doubt, I required evidence. Not speculation, not intuition. Solid proof that Margaret had exposed the association. And in my profession, evidence doesn't originate from storage or cellars. It originates from individuals who understand where infrastructures collapse. That's why I traveled to the regional administration complex in town. The structure with the worn granite stairs and a continuous flow of residents ascending them, with document folders beneath their shoulders. Within, the atmosphere contained document and ink scents, the surfaces covered with announcement panels filled with regional warnings. I proceeded to the records department where terminals positioned prepared for community documentation inquiries. I accessed the system and inputted the association's organizational title. The interface loaded gradually, yet when the document appeared, my heartbeat accelerated. Yearly submissions, revenue papers, charitable status, everything was present. And then the void emerged like a breach in a barrier. No insurance documentation registered. No extension filed. The previous one had terminated 8 months prior, never renewed. I generated the display, my grip firm despite the excitement. This was beyond mere doubt. Margaret had wagered with all residents' futures through allowing the committee to function exposed legally. If a minor injured themselves, if a resident sustained harm, if a dispute became physical, all committee participants were individually responsible. That represented the type of carelessness no association chair could conceal. Yet the actual strength wasn't merely in what I discovered, it was in how I'd utilize it. I crossed the complex to the Liability Administration Office, where a colleague from my construction periods currently operated as an advisor for civic responsibility situations. His title was Harrison, a lean individual with spectacles constantly descending his bridge. When I displayed him the generated documentation, he released a quiet exclamation. "They're vulnerable," he stated directly. "Single litigation, including a small damage, and the committee participants are individually accountable. Their properties, their funds, their income eliminated. And if the authorities discover there's been bodily aggression on association grounds, dismiss it. The region will terminate them." I appreciated him securing the documents within my portfolio. Harrison's statements weren't merely verification. They were weaponry. Margaret believed she could intimidate me with penalties and claims. Yet this wasn't regarding penalties now. This was regarding the committee's existence, and I currently possessed the flame above their explosives. Traveling home, I experienced the mass of the portfolio on the adjacent seat like a compressed mechanism. My child's playhouse remained restricted, the orange tape moving in the twilight wind. She positioned on the entrance stairs, face in palms, observing the swing as if it had transformed into restricted area. I knelt near her, removing the tape once more. "It's not hazardous," I murmured, my voice strained. "It's the most secure location in this district, and shortly, all will understand it." Her gaze raised to mine, exploring, unsure. I manufactured a expression. Yet internally I experienced the flame solidify into iron. Margaret had violated all boundaries, and currently, I possessed the instruments to terminate her control. Triumph methodology advancement. Through examining formal regional documentation and confirming the absent coverage documentation via liability administration, I acquired solid evidence of Margaret's carelessness. This finding established the route toward external jurisdiction involvement, guaranteeing the association's vulnerability could no longer be rejected as speculation. The portfolio positioned on my dining surface like a prepared armament. Sheets of evidence marked and authenticated, demonstrating that Margaret Thornfield had been managing the association, lacking protection coverage for almost 12 months. I'd examined those papers so extensively that the text merged collectively, yet I understood their meaning. This wasn't merely influence. This was the spike that could fasten her and all committee participants to the surface. Yet evidence lacking implementation is merely documentation. I required someone who could employ it with the type of authority Margaret couldn't dismiss, and I understood precisely where to deliver it. That twilight, I traveled to the regional law enforcement station adjacent to the interstate. The area was silent, the structure rectangular and neutral, a national banner flapping in the breeze over the doorway. I crossed through the transparent entries, portfolio beneath my shoulder, and entered the chilled buzz of bright illumination and dispatch communications. Officers traversed the entrance, footwear reverberating on flooring, yet it was a single individual I arrived to visit. My brother-in-law, Captain Robert Bradford, had carried the shield for 3 decades. He was an individual who trusted in boundaries, definite ones separating correct from incorrect, and when those boundaries were violated, he didn't pause. He was in his workspace, a mounted photograph of us angling on the water positioned on his surface. When he observed the expression on my countenance, he didn't engage in pleasantries. "What's she executed currently?" he inquired. I placed the portfolio before him and revealed it to the marked sections. "It's beyond intimidation now. Margaret has been managing the association lacking coverage. All aggressive behavior, all penalty, all intimidation. If something occurs on association property, the committee participants are individually responsible." He corrected his eyewear, reviewing the papers, his mouth firming. "You're informing me she's been endangering this complete district for periods?" I confirmed. "And previously she placed her grip on my child. If this doesn't cease, someone's ending up hospitalized or more severe." The space became motionless, excluding the rhythm of the surface timepiece. My brother-in-law reclined, crossing his shoulders. "You understand what this indicates, Marcus? This isn't merely regulatory now. This borders on unlawful carelessness. If I deliver this to the regional prosecutor, she'll possess no protection remaining, and if she continues advancing, I'll possess all justification to intervene with authority." That was precisely what I required to perceive. My brother-in-law's involvement wasn't merely relatives. It was jurisdiction, the type Margaret couldn't coerce with penalties or hammer blows. The regulations didn't submit to association regulations, and Margaret was preparing to discover that. While I departed the facility, a tempest was forming on the edge. Dark formations moved across the forest boundary, rumbling, echoing in the space. It appeared appropriate. Margaret had been operating at control in a sphere of dominance, yet tempests don't respect spheres. They shatter them apart. When I returned to the district, I reduced speed approaching the facility. Margaret's vehicle was stationed outside, its custom identification shining like a tiara. Via the glass, I observed her positioned with 2 committee participants, tones elevated, palms cutting the atmosphere. Including from a gap, I could sense she was failing her control. Anxiety of revelation was seeping into her act, and her supporters were starting to observe it. I didn't pause. I traveled residence, entered the entrance, and observed my child positioned on the entrance once more. This moment, she wasn't viewing the playhouse. "She was viewing me, Father," she stated quietly. "Are they planning to remove it?" I bent near her, the tempest breeze raising portions of her locks. "No," I informed her. "They're the individuals who are preparing to forfeit all, and I intended it, because currently the risks were beyond individual. I had delivered the reality to the single individual who could transform it into regulation." And the subsequent moment Margaret attempted to compress her grip, she'd discover it trapped in the control of the captain personally. Triumph methodology advancement. Through positioning the revealed proof in the possession of my brother-in-law, the captain, I heightened the dispute into formal lawful area. External jurisdiction was currently explicitly engaged, guaranteeing the association's carelessness couldn't stay an internal issue. The tempest ultimately arrived that evening, striking the glass and overwhelming the drains as though the complete atmosphere had chosen to press upon us. I positioned at the dining surface, the portfolio of proof still distributed available, when a strike arrived at the entrance. It was pointed, urgent, nothing similar to the typical resident strike. My child moved overhead, yet I informed her to remain positioned. When I revealed the entrance, David Chen positioned there, drenched completely, precipitation flowing from his locks and saturating his necktie level on his clothing. His gaze moved beyond me into the residence, then returned toward the road as though he anticipated Margaret personally to emerge from the darkness. "May I arrive inside?" he inquired, his tone quiet and strained. I moved back. He entered the dining area, his footwear creating damp impressions on the timber. He didn't position immediately. Rather, he lingered close to the surface, viewing the portfolio of documents like it was something toxic. His palms shook at his flanks before he ultimately removed a seat and fell into it. For an extended period, the single noise was the precipitation striking the ceiling. Then he murmured, "You were correct." I didn't communicate. I desired him to continue releasing. David forced his hands on his temples, respiring heavily. Margaret? She never extended the documentation. She informed us it was a processing postponement, yet periods elapsed and zero. I maintained inquiring, maintained raising it in assemblies. She dismissed me each moment. His palms fell to the surface, shaking. She stated if we acknowledged it, the committee would collapse and the litigation would destroy us. She commanded me to conceal it in the records. She forced me to deceive. His statements arrived in explosions, his physical communication unprocessed with dispute. He reclined backward, then ahead once more as if attempting to flee the mass forcing on his torso. His grip excavated into the border of the surface, joints paling. Each action indicated of an individual ultimately shattering beneath the remorse he'd transported excessively extended. I advanced the portfolio approaching him, turning it available to the regional documentation. "It's previously revealed, David. I've obtained the evidence. What I require is someone internally to verify it." He trembled his skull aggressively initially, then reduced, gaze moving to the roof as though determining the expense. His mouth separated, sealed, then separated once more. Ultimately, he released like an individual preparing to leap from a cliff. "I can provide you the committee's accounting, the actual ones, not the cleaned statements Margaret displays at assemblies. She's been redirecting contributions into her personal funds, directing currency via false repair vendors. I've maintained duplicates, Marcus. I couldn't eliminate them, including when she informed me to." My torso constricted. It was more severe than I believed. Margaret wasn't merely careless. She was stealing. That clarified her urgency, her anger when I questioned her deception. If the district observed those figures, she'd be complete. David passed a palm across his countenance, his tone fracturing. "I can't exist similar to this further. All households she's demolished, all money she's taken. It's on me also. Yet if I provide you those documents, she'll understand it originated from me, and you've observed what she's able of." I inclined ahead, my tone firm. "David, the captain previously possesses the coverage evidence. Margaret's structure of deception is falling. You don't need to defeat her independently, yet you do need to choose whose position you're on when it collapses." His palms shook once more, then became motionless. He confirmed once, pointed, conclusive. "The following day, I'll deliver the documents the following day." He rose, his seat grinding on the surface, and drew his drenched coat close. At the entrance, he hesitated, precipitation beating on the window. His frame curved, yet when he rotated backward, his gaze were more transparent than they had been at the water. "She doesn't merit this authority further, and I won't shield her deceptions." Then he was eliminated, consumed by the tempest, abandoning solely soiled shoe marks over my surface and the reverberation of his admission in the space. Triumph methodology advancement. The torn observer ultimately admitted, verifying Margaret had concealed the expired coverage and exposing a more extensive stealing plot. His commitment to supply solid accounting proof provided me the crucial influence required to activate external jurisdiction involvement. Triumph methodology advancement. Through providing proof to the prosecutor and mobilizing the district's doubt into determination, I cemented the external jurisdiction's engagement. The platform was currently established for a community encounter where Margaret could no further conceal after coercion. The evening prior to the committee assembly, I scarcely rested. I maintained walking the residence, examining the folder, examining the schedule in my skull. All had directed to this period, Margaret Thornfield, the self-declared monarch of our community, would ultimately be required to confront her residents with the reality viewing her downward. I understood she would struggle, reject, strike away, yet it didn't count. The proof was unbreakable, and the regulations were arriving with me. The subsequent twilight, the district facility area exceeded with vehicles. Beams illuminated the borders of the structure, tones reverberating from the pavement, and the strain in the atmosphere experienced like a cable extended excessively firm. Households arrived in assemblies, several clutching their breach warnings like protections, rest with shoulders crossed firm over their torsos. All understood something was preparing to shatter. I moved away from my vehicle with the folder beneath my shoulder, the chilled evening atmosphere stinging on my flesh. A quiet dropped across the assembly as I strolled approaching the doorway. Residents separated, providing me area, yet their gazes pursued me, optimistic and anxious all simultaneously. After me, I perceived the clear noise of footwear on concrete. I rotated and observed my brother-in-law, Captain Robert Bradford, accompanied by officers in complete gear. Tactical enforcement equipment wasn't merely for coercion. It was protection against Margaret's disorder overflowing into aggression. Within the district corridor, the extended surfaces were arranged as constantly, yet this evening the space was filled. Individuals occupied all seats positioned along the barriers and packed in the entrance. The aroma of musty jackets and moist garments adhered to the atmosphere. Margaret positioned at the stage, hammer in palm, her crystal necklace reflecting the overhead illumination. She grinned as if zero was incorrect, yet her gaze moved anxiously, approaching the captain as he arrived. She struck the hammer on the surface. This assembly is summoned to sequence. We possess critical breaches to examine this evening. No. My brother-in-law's tone thundered, interrupting her. He moved ahead, shield shining. This evening the breaches being examined are yours. A whisper moved via the assembly, ascending into a quiet rumble. Margaret's expression constricted, yet she attempted to maintain her facade. This is a residence assembly. You possess no jurisdiction present. I moved to the stage, positioning the folder directly on the surface. That's where you're incorrect. You've been functioning lacking protection coverage for periods. All household present has been abandoned vulnerable due to your carelessness. And more severe, you've been taking from them contributions directed into your individual funds, ghost vendors, false bills. It's everything present. I revealed the folder, distributing the document so all could observe the condemning proof. Breaths erupted from the assembly. Residents inclined ahead, gazes broad, murmuring in shock. David rose in the rear, white yet firm, providing the tiniest confirmation. His treachery of Margaret was total. Margaret's palm trembled on the hammer. She attempted to giggle, yet the noise fractured. These are fabrications, distortions. He's manipulating figures, providing you deception. My brother-in-law's tone sliced via once more. The regional prosecutor has previously examined this proof. Allegations are being prepared. This evening is not regarding you dominating this district further. It's regarding responsibility. He indicated an officer's position to both flanks of the space. The assembly separated automatically, a flow of comfort and anxiety passing via them. Margaret stood to her position, her facade ultimately breaking. You can't execute this to me. I constructed this district. Zero of you would possess a tone if it weren't for me. She yelled at the assembly, yet her statements merely powered their fury. Guardians held their kids nearer. Males and females who had previously lowered their skulls beneath her control currently elevated them tall, staring with anger. I moved nearer, my tone quiet yet transporting. You didn't construct this district, Margaret. You contaminated it, and this evening it begins to recover. The space exploded, not in disorder, yet in cheers. It began with a single resident, then an additional, till the corridor trembled with striking and applause. Margaret's expression became red, her palms still holding the pointless hammer. Initially she appeared tiny. The cheers didn't cease. It expanded till the barriers of the district corridor appeared to tremble with it. Residents who had previously murmured in anxiety were currently rising high, their tones ultimately liberated. Margaret Thornfield held the hammer so firmly her joints became pale. Yet no quantity of striking could silence the noise of 100 tones ascending toward her. Sequence, she yelled, her expression spotted crimson. This is chaotic behavior. You're all breaching association regulations. Yet zero individual was hearing. The fantasy of her jurisdiction had broken, and she understood it. Individuals started rising individually, clutching their breach warnings like proof in a hearing. Thomas Mitchell elevated his yellow violation for his barrier. "You penalized me $600 for this? While you were taking our contributions after our returns?" His tone transported over the space, and rest accompanied him, brandishing their personal warnings in the atmosphere. Margaret struck the hammer once more, the pointed snap sounding away, yet at no further transported mass. The captain moved ahead, his officers covering the barriers. In situation, the anger of the assembly became unmanageable. His attendance independently was sufficient to maintain the disorder from overflowing into aggression. Yet the space was ablaze with fury. From the center line, a parent with an infant on her waist rose upward, her tone shaking yet transparent. "You intimidated me with seizure due to a planter container. A planter container. While my partner was stationed abroad, you attempted to frighten me into quiet." She glanced surrounding, her gaze intense. "We don't respond to you further." Applause exploded, residents striking, pounding their souls. The power moved like a current. Margaret's mouth shifted, yet no noise emerged. She appeared trapped, gaze moving frantically as though exploring for a supporter, yet including her committee participants had ceased acting. David Chen rose at the rear, his skull lowered for a period prior to he raised it, ultimately moving ahead. The space silenced, merely sufficient for his statements. Margaret commanded me to conceal the reality. She informed me to distort the records, to act we possessed insurance when we didn't. I remained quiet, yet I won't further. "The accounting documentation you observe present are actual. She redirected your currency into her individual funds." The response was urgent. Breaths, yells, the snap of anger shattering into complete fury. Residents who had existed beneath Margaret's control for periods rotated on her all simultaneously. Several yelled for her departure. Rest required her detention. A song elevated from the rear lines, developing more audible till it occupied the corridor. "Leave immediately. Leave immediately." Margaret's facade fell completely. She hurled the hammer over the surface, directing a shaking grip at David. "You betrayer, you weak fool. Do you believe they'll pardon you? Do you believe you'll depart untainted?" Yet zero individual arrived to her protection. Including the remaining committee participants moved their seats backward, separating themselves as if her poison could overflow onto them subsequently. I moved ahead, elevating my palm for quiet. Gradually the sound decreased, although the strain still hummed like active cable. I connected Margaret's stare directly. "This isn't merely regarding me or my child or the playhouse you attempted to eliminate. This is regarding all household present you extracted from, all tone you quieted, all minor you created to experience dangerous in their personal property. Your control is complete, Margaret, and the district you attempted to shatter is more powerful due to it." The captain positioned near me, his attendance imposing. "Margaret Thornfield," he stated, his tone serene yet persistent. "The regional prosecutor will be delivering you with allegations. Till then, you are removed from all association engagement immediately. Officers will accompany you from this corridor this evening." The tempest disappeared by dawn, abandoning limbs distributed over yards and the aroma of damp soil thick in the atmosphere. I strolled the district in the morning, portfolio beneath my shoulder, replaying David's statements from the evening prior. His admission wasn't merely a weakness in Margaret's appearance, it was the demolition sphere. Coverage carelessness was a single matter, yet stealing converted this into felony area. And once those accounting appeared, the captain wouldn't merely step in, he'd disassemble her committee section by section. By afternoon, I traveled to my workspace in town. It wasn't significant, merely a simple office I utilized for advisory projects. Diagrams and regulation guides covered the racks, the aroma of brew remaining from the prior container. Present, distant from the district I could reason transparently, I distributed the papers over the planning surface like riddle sections. The regional submissions near the portfolio David had committed to contribute. I outlined the order, evidence of expired coverage, statement from the accountant, and accounting documentation demonstrating theft. 3 foundations, individually powerful independently, yet collectively they created a fall no magistrate, prosecutor, or regional authority could dismiss. Margaret had portrayed herself as invulnerable. I would demonstrate her base was decayed completely. I removed my device and contacted Harrison, the civic liability advisor I'd consulted previously. He responded with his typical brief voice. When I clarified what David had admitted, there was a silence, then a pointed breath. If your accountant provides those documents, Marcus, you don't even require regulatory tribunal. That's felony deception. The prosecutor will consume this completely. And with the captain previously conscious of the coverage void, you've obtained beyond influence. You've obtained a situation that can activate urgent involvement. That was precisely the transparency I required. This wasn't merely regarding protecting my child's playhouse further. It was regarding shielding the complete district from a thief who'd been consuming their confidence. While I positioned backward, rumbling grumbled distantly in the gap. Although the atmosphere over the metropolis was transparent, anxieties experienced like that tempest moving merely under the exterior. David had committed to provide the accounting presently, yet commitments from a torn individual are delicate matters. If anxiety conquered him, if Margaret detected his treachery, all could fall prior to it started. Time elapsed. I examined the regulations once more, marking portions, arranging proof into tagged folders. By the moment the strike arrived at my workspace entrance, the daylight had lowered small, cleaning the space in amber illumination. David entered within, frame curved, gaze moving like an individual who anticipated all darkness to attack. His case was held so firmly his joints had become white. He placed it on the surface, lacking a statement, his respiration rapid and low. When he revealed it, the materials distributed over the timber, financial records, vendor bills, written remarks. I identified the designs instantly. Replicate invoicing, ghost corporations. Contributions moved into individual funds disguised as crisis groundskeeping. Margaret hadn't merely redirected hundreds, she'd taken sufficient to insolvency the association if it ever emerged to illumination. David massaged his forehead, trembling his skull. I ought to have prevented her. I ought to have stated something earlier. His tone fractured, unprocessed and harsh. Yet I was frightened. Frightened of forfeiting all. Frightened of her. I positioned a palm on the surface, firm, persistent. You prevented her currently. That's what counts. Initially, he connected my gaze, lacking wavering. The tempest within him hadn't disappeared, yet he'd selected a position. I collected the documents, moving them into the folder near the regional papers. Collectively, they created an armament more pointed than something Margaret could have envisioned. Coverage carelessness and monetary stealing. Evidence so condemning including her supporters would rotate. While I secured the folder closed, I experienced something change. This wasn't protection further. This was attack. For periods, Margaret had controlled the tempo, attacking, ridiculing, prohibiting. Yet with David's admission in possession, the current had rotated. Currently, she was the individual vulnerable, her kingdom previously falling beneath its personal mass. Triumph methodology advancement. With David's proof protected and merged with formal documentation, I completed the structure for external jurisdiction involvement. The captain and regional prosecutor would possess all required to disassemble Margaret's dominance, establishing the platform for the conclusive encounter. I departed my workspace that evening with the folder secured in my container, the mass of it more substantial than iron. Proof of carelessness, evidence of deception, statement from the accountant. It wasn't merely weaponry further. It was a detonator, and once I activated it, there'd be no reversal. Margaret Thornfield had controlled via anxiety and coercion, yet anxiety can't prevent the regulations when the proof is unbreakable. The subsequent dawn, I traveled to the regional tribunal. The granite appearance towered toward the atmosphere, its columns aged yet persistent like the regulations it protected within. I moved via protection, the buzz of the scanner and the movement of documents in the records department reverberating surrounding me. The folder forced on my flank as though to inform me of what was within, the conclusion of Margaret's authority. Within the regional prosecutor's workspace, I delivered the folder to an deputy attorney. She turned via the papers with expert neutrality, yet I observed her forehead wrinkle more profoundly with every section. By the moment she arrived at the financial records, her instrument was previously marking remarks over a bright, lawful document. This is critical, she whispered. Coverage carelessness independently is regulatory vulnerability, yet deception of this magnitude. She glanced upward at me. If this validates, we're discussing felony allegations. Your association chair could be confronting incarceration. The statements arrived with certainty. Margaret wasn't merely an excessive intimidator further. She was a felon anticipating to be revealed. I departed the tribunal and traveled, approaching the community, the autumn atmosphere fresh via the opened glass. While I neared the district, I moved a minor recreational area where households collected on holidays. Presently, however, the seating were filled by groups of inhabitants, their tones quiet yet pressing. I reduced and detected pieces of dialogue, violations, penalties, claims. Individuals were furious, affirmative, yet under the fury was something more pointed. Interest. They'd observed Margaret falter, and they desired to understand why. I stationed and strolled across my attendants' rotating skulls. An individual I identified, Thomas Mitchell, who'd been penalized for his barrier, rose and folded his shoulders. "Marcus, is it accurate what you stated regarding the coverage?" Numerous gazes were on me. For a period I evaluated dismissing it, yet this was the period to rotate their uncertainty into determination. "Affirmative," I stated strongly. "They've abandoned you all vulnerable for periods, and it's more severe than that. Your contributions haven't been funding for upkeep. They've been funding for Margaret's individual funds." A wave of surprise distributed via the assembly. Guardians traded expressions. A female with her infant on her waist trembled her skull in shock. Fury solidified into something fresh, determination. I didn't display them the documents immediately. That would arrive when the captain and regional prosecutor created it formal. Yet I didn't require to. The commitment of revelation was sufficient to change the current. Individuals who had previously maintained their skulls lowered currently rose higher. Anxiety was dissolving, and once it was eliminated, Margaret would possess 0 remaining. While the assembly separated, multiple residents approached me silently. One proposed to confirm regarding being forced into funding unique evaluations in money. Another murmured that Margaret had intimidated to litigate her if she communicated to the media. Every narrative contributed an additional stone to the barrier ceiling and surrounding her. By the moment I came residence, the daylight was descending across the water, throwing a crimson shine over the liquid. My child positioned on the swing once more, the orange barrier eliminated permanently. She thrust her feet ascending greater, her giggles transporting on the breeze. It was the noise I struggled for, the prompt of why this counted. Within, I collected the device and contacted my brother-in-law. His tone was firm on the opposite side. "The prosecutor's workspace verified what you provided them. They're preparing allegations. Subsequent phase is the committee assembly. I'll be present, and I won't be independent." It's moment Margaret responds to the district and the regulations. I disconnected. The tempest formations of the previous periods ultimately starting to disperse. The confrontation was unavoidable currently, and it would be community. Margaret had performed her palm for excessively extended in the darkness. Subsequent moment, the illumination would be intense, the space complete, and all deception she'd spoken would fall beneath its personal mass. Her jaw revealed an objection, yet the noise was silenced as the assembly exploded once more. This moment not in disorder, yet in victory. Guardians embraced their kids. Partners held palms. Residents who hadn't communicated in periods hugged like previous companions. The mass that had suspended across the community for periods was rising, substituted by something uncommon and strong, optimism. Margaret's gaze ignited as officers positioned approaching her. Her yells of "You'll lament this" reverberating into 0. Initially, since this horror started, I experienced the earth firm beneath my soles. The assembly wasn't separated further. They weren't frightened. They were joined. Triumph methodology advancement. With David's community admission and the captain's jurisdiction, the district encounter removed Margaret of authority. The external jurisdiction involvement was no further awaiting. It was occurring in actual moment beneath the rumble of her personal residence tones. The officers accompanied Margaret Thornfield away from the corridor, her yells reverberating into the evening, yet the noise scarcely recorded further. The assembly had previously rotated their attention somewhere else, approaching one another, approaching what arrived subsequently. It was as though the curse she had thrown across the community had been shattered all simultaneously, and individuals were awakening from periods of compliance. Residents who had existed flank by flank in quiet were currently grouped in assemblies communicating quickly, distributing their narratives. Several cried in comfort. Rest expressed their anger. Yet all tone transported the identical foundation: liberation. Initially, the district belonged to them once more. not to Margaret's hammer or her created policies. I rose close to the stage, fatigue overwhelming via me. My brother-in-law, the captain, positioned a substantial palm on my frame. It's complete, Marcus. The prosecutor's workspace will pursue via. Allegations like these don't vanish, I confirmed, although my gaze moved approaching David. He remained at the border of the assembly, frame drooping, the mass of remorse still forcing him downward. I strolled to him, and for a period he wouldn't glance at me. His gaze remained secured on the surface till I stated, "You executed the correct matter this evening." Ultimately, he raised his skull. His tone was quiet, rough, excessively delayed for the households who funded the cost. Perhaps, I stated, yet not excessively delayed for the remainder. You provided them the reality. That counts. He provided the slightest confirmation, and although the remorse didn't disappear, I could observe the comfort starting to establish. He wasn't Margaret's captive further. 0 of us were. The assembly melted into the station area where the chilled atmosphere transported the noise of residents creating strategies. Several communicated regarding fresh votes. Rest regarding returning taken contributions. Guardians discussed regarding eliminating the violations from their kids' documentation. What hit me greatest was the change in their tones. They weren't requesting consent. They were choosing for personally. When I arrived at my vehicle, my child was anticipating within. She forced her expression on the glass till I revealed the entrance, and then she jumped into my shoulders. Her tone was quiet on my torso. "Father, it's complete." I embraced her more firmly than I had in periods. "Affirmative," I murmured. "It's complete." "They can't affect us further." She grinned when we traveled beyond the playhouse, its ropes shining in the lunar illumination. No orange barrier, no breach indicators, merely a remembrance created permanent once more, positioned in resistance of all Margaret attempted to delete. My child's giggles occupied the vehicle as she pleaded me to swing her on it the following day, greater than prior, and initially I could commit her lacking pause. Returning at residence, I positioned on the entrance while the evening silenced surrounding us. The water glittered with mirrored celestials, serene following periods of tempests. I considered regarding my partner, regarding the present she abandoned after in that swing, and regarding how near Margaret had arrived to removing it distant. Yet heritages aren't so simply eliminated. They persist, including when despots attempt to cover them. The district would reconstruct personally currently, not beneath intimidations or penalties, yet beneath collaboration. The committee would be transformed, the accounting restored, and confidence gradually rebuilt. It wouldn't be rapid and it wouldn't be simple, yet it would be ours once more. And that was valuable, all struggle, all restless evening, all danger. While I sealed my gaze and heard to the liquid striking on the bank, I experienced tranquility come back. Not due to the conflict was simple, yet due to it was achieved the correct method, with reality, with solidarity, with a district choosing it would no further exist beneath anxiety. And if you desire additional narratives of property owners rising to association despotism, follow immediately.